Well, the status game is something that we're always doing in life. So humans are programmed to want to pursue status, to achieve status. So we're being virtuous, we're being courageous or kind or generous. We deny it in ourselves quite well, but we see it in other people all the time. It's like, why would you want to opt out? Because to me, opting out of the status game, that's the definition of a loser.
About the higher up in status you are, the longer you are likely to live.
The human brain craves connection and status. The lower the status, the higher the mortality rate.
Because you can't fall. That's the
That's
worst bit.
Yeah.
Is you can't afford to go down.
What has changed the way I see the world is understanding all that stuff about drugs gangs, about terrorist gangs. Like, happiness is about identity. It's about how connected am I, how much status do I have. I think if you want to have happy kids, figure out the thing that they're quite good at. I had a very unhappy childhood. I went to a very bad school, but I left school without any A-levels.
Don't listen to what anybody else tells you. Only you know what you're capable of.
And I think that's the trap that we tend to fall into. When we are selfless and good and we help people, we feel good about ourselves. And that's the fundamental of the human condition. That's how we've evolved. Virtue and competence. Those are those two ways that people judge you. One of the best things about living where we do in the West is that we have this.
Hello, I'm Dr. Vanita Rattan.
And I'm Anisha Vasani.
Welcome to Taboo Table Talks, where we're uncovering controversial topics in a modern world.
It's time to change conversations and question the status quo. We are proud to introduce our next guest, Will Storr, who is a British award-winning author, journalist, former photographer and public speaker. He has written 6 books under his name. His books on storytelling and the human condition are widely read by highly influential people globally. Will Storr is the writer's writer and the thinker's thinker. Today, we will be discussing his latest published book, The Status Games, where he shares his theory about the hidden structure of social life, focusing on the need for social status, its effects on individual human life and society. So welcome, Will, and thank you for coming onto our podcast. We absolutely loved reading your book, The Status Games. Such an eye-opener, fully inspirational. Couldn't, honestly, just was reading chapter after chapter.
Honestly, I made everybody read it. I made my husband read it, my mum and dad read it, my brother, everybody. I feel like before reading this book, I didn't really understand why people were making subpar decisions and why people put so much emphasis on things that I didn't know how it, linked into their own identity, and how it was almost you're attacking their own identity if your football team loses, for example. I think this book was just a revelation to so many people. So thank you for putting it together and all the years of research it took to put this together.
Oh, thank you for reading it. Thank you for having me on. It's good to be here. Thank you.
So our first question, obviously, to you is, what is the status games and why do we play them?
Well, the status game is something that we're always doing in life. So humans are programmed to want to pursue status, to achieve status. And it's part of our makeup. And the status game book is describing the fact that we're not just playing one status game in life, we're playing many, many status games. And pretty much every group we belong to, every identity we have, be it a mother or a football player or an architect or a collector of Star Wars memorabilia, all of those are going to be different status games. All of those are going to be different sources of status in our life that we take, usually very seriously.
Why do we play status games? And so you talk about it being inbuilt as part of our DNA. We had to do it in order to procreate, to have the best mate, to have, food, etc., highest chances of survival of our children. So the question for me then is, why do we crave it but are embarrassed to say that we crave it?
All right, so there's 2 questions there, so I'll answer one at a time. So the first question is, so why do we crave it? So it's quite common in the animal kingdom for animals to compete for status. So if you think about, when hens meet each other, they peck at each other until a pecking order is established. So it's a way of organising cooperative life. If animals have to live together, there has to be an idea of a hierarchy so they're not constantly fighting. But humans have this kind of weird evolutionary history. So we're a species of ape. We know we're not like an ape or evolved from apes. We are a species of ape. But we're obviously a very different, weird species of ape. And what's weird about us is that we've mastered the art of cooperation, of working together, of solving the problems of life by coming into groups and the group solves the problem rather than in the individual solves the problem. So some psychologists say we're part A, part B, we're so cooperative, we're like bees. But how do you do that? So we used to compete for status like most animals do, which is with aggression, with fighting each other. But if you're going to live together and work together, you can't just be fighting each other all the time, because that's a nightmare. It just doesn't work. So evolution had to come up with these new ways of us to sort of play status games. And so we started playing games with kind of reputation, with, rather than sort of fighting each other, with earning reputation with each other. And so the way we earn reputation is by, because we're groupish, we're tribal, is by proving our value to the group. So there are two ways of proving your value to human groups. One is by being virtuous, by being courageous or kind or generous. Another way is with competence, by becoming really skillful at something. And when you're virtuous or competent, you're being of value to everybody else. And that's nature's reward system. When we're of value to other people, they raise us in status. And the more status we had 20,000 years ago, the better our lives would be. We'd be rewarded with better food, our choice of mates, better sleeping sites, our children would be treated better. And of course, what was true 20,000 years ago is still true today. We still have the same brains. So that's why we feel like we have to pursue status all the time, is because that's the way, that's nature's kind of reward for us being cooperative, being human, being kind of a good cooperative tribal human. So that's the first part, that's why. The second part is why do we kind of deny it? So a lot of this is subconscious. It's been part of the human makeup for millions of years. Since before we were human, we competed for status, and of course the reputation stuff is partly how we became human. But why we deny it is slightly complicated. So when you think of that kind of voice in your head that's telling you all the reasons for why you do things and sort of telling you the story of your life, so that's designed to be a kind of not really to tell the truth about who you are, because it actually doesn't have access to your subconscious. It doesn't know the truth of who you are. The bits that voice in your head that's telling you, I don't compete for status, doesn't know, because it doesn't have access to the parts of your brain that are competing for status. And that voice has been evolved, it's been designed by evolution for tribal life. And tribal life could be quite dangerous in some ways. If you broke the rules of the tribe, you could be killed. That's the reality of life 20, 30,000 years ago. It's thought that capital punishment was once a human universal. And it wasn't just for doing terrible things like murder. Like in some examples in the book, like for example, in one tribe, if a woman looked at the man's sacred flute, she could be killed. Or somebody walked on the secret path, they could be killed. So life was really hard. So we evolved this kind of almost like a pitch man, a pitch woman in our head, defending us. No. So and I think that's partly why we deny our pursuit of status. We go, no, I'm not pursuing status. I'm not trying to get onto everybody else. I'm being a good person. So I think that's partly why it is. It's this kind of slightly dishonest kind of pitch we have in our heads that sort of emerges as this voice that's giving us these excuses all the time. But you only have to look at the world to see that that's not true. I mean, it's just everywhere. I mean, if you look at social media, look at religion. I mean, I was raised Catholic. Yeah. The way you have to genuflect to the priest and call him father, and he's got a big hat and a gold chalice. I mean, it's front and center of human life, isn't it? So we deny it in ourselves quite well, but we see it in other people all the time.
Interesting.
It is, isn't it?
I've started to see it in myself. So then I would, you start to analyze yourself. And you think, okay, so I'm playing status games. Okay, so which games am I playing? And I go straight to, it's not dominant status games. I'm not like hitting anyone. I think I'm playing competent status games.
Yeah.
And I totally understand how, when I remember my first ever paycheck, I went and bought myself my first designer handbag, and that was a competent status game. It's I earned this much money and I bought this. And now I think that's an embarrassing game. I don't want to play that anymore. I want to play how smart am I, or how much do I know about skincare, or how great are my products. So you start playing a different competent status games, but actually I'm still playing a game. And the question is, then can you ever opt out of the game? If you know the game exists and you're self-analyzing, is there a way for you to opt out?
So there isn't a way to opt out, because it's part of the human condition. And my question always is, because people ask this sometimes, it's like, why would you want to opt out? Because to me, opting out of the status game, that's the definition of a loser. Because I think the way to see status is not, I want all the attention, I want to be rich and famous and all that. That's a very cynical way of seeing it. What status really is I'm of value to the human family. I'm achieving stuff. I'm either being a good person or just figuring stuff out, inventing stuff that is offering value to people. And that's what you're doing with your skincare mission. You're creating new products which are making people's lives better, making women happy. So it's absolutely appropriate that you should be rewarded with status and all the things that come with it. It's not only appropriate, it's good. It's like the best of the human condition. The fact that we have this inbuilt software in our heads that when people are good, kind, or competent, they're are brilliant at something, we automatically offer them status and look up to them and go, wow, that's amazing. That's a wonderful thing. So I quite passionately believe that we should kind of reboot our view of status, because of course it leads to lots of bad things, it does, but it also leads to some of the best things about the human condition. Like without the pursuit of status, we wouldn't have civilization. We wouldn't have houses and cars and computers and central heating and vaccines and the medical industry. That's all driven in part by people going, I want to be brilliant. I want to help people. And so it's it is a fantastic thing, and which I think we should stop looking down our nose at it a little bit. There are some people who try to opt out of it. In Japan, they call them the hikikomori. They're people who find it very hard to cope with social pressure. Of course, Japan is famously a very tough culture, a very demanding culture, and they're not happy people. They often die alone, and famously nobody knows they're dead and they're discovered 6 months later. Like, this is not who you want to end up as, and those are the people that try to remove themselves from the status game. The other kinds of people that try to remove themselves are people who do lots of mindfulness meditation.
Yes.
And there was a study that I write about in the book, as you know, from the University of Amsterdam, where they found 2,700 people, I think it was 3,700 people actually, who practiced mindfulness meditation specifically to reduce their ego needs, they called it, but to stop wanting status. And what they found when they studied these people was that they scored very highly on a measure of spiritual superiority.
Oh, so they're playing their own game.
Exactly. They So and it's funny because that's just what humans are like, So they got into the mindfulness, and they started feeling pretty good about themselves. And they started feeling actually, and they were saying things like, the world would be a better place if only other people had the insights that I had. Exactly. They were just. What their brains did was just found a new status game to play.
That was interesting, because that was our question next, is like, do monks play status games? Because obviously they're all preaching about spirituality, but they're like you said, playing a status game with other spiritual leaders in their own way.
Completely, yeah. I mean, I lived with some monks for a previous book called Selfie.
Oh, wow.
And I was amazed because my assumption with monks was they go into the community and do good deeds, but they don't do it at all. They just sit in there. They're just sat in their monastery, praying, doing lots and lots of praying and singing, and they grow strawberries and things. And I was like, what's the point of this then? And really, what the point was that they sincerely believe in Christianity, obviously. They believed that if they did what they were doing and did it really well, they'd end up in heaven, and heaven was amazing. It was paradise. So it's a kind of, Christianity, all religion is a status game, but in the West, in the capitalist world, we're used to thinking of status being, how do you signify status? Well, money, handbags, whatever. But of course, that hasn't always been that way. In times prior to capitalism, it was very religious based, and your status game was religious. How spiritual are you? How closely are you following the Ten Commandments? And that's the game that the monks are playing. How close to God are you? And the reward is not in this life. The reward is in the afterlife, in heaven, when they're going to live these fabulous, so it was almost weirdly capitalistic. They were like working really hard, not for other people, because they weren't helping other people. They were working really hard so they could get these rewards in heaven when they died. Yeah,
that's interesting, because in our South Asian culture, especially because I'm Hindu and Gujarati, we've got like different castes and cultures, and it's like the highest caste culture has the higher the status. So they were either, like rich bankers, or they were, gold miners. So, the higher the status. So even back then, our ancestors were all part of status games. And I found that really interesting when you're talking about, the Eastern culture being very different, where they're being more collective compared to the Western culture. So you're right. I think our ancestors were all playing these status games, both culturally as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even
right.
to do with respect with parents and how they used to bow down to them. And I know you got a chapter in the book that refers to a lot of that as well, where women had to be really respectful to their their husbands, but also to the parents as well. They couldn't do anything without obviously it getting approved by parents.
Yeah, I mean, even Buddhism, which is people think about Buddhism as being the ultimate. I don't care about the ego. Is the kind of anti-ego ideology, but it's so hierarchical. And traditional Buddhism is all about reincarnation and being reincarnated at these different levels. I mean, even Buddhism has these. I went on a 10-day Buddhist retreat in Australia a few years ago, and the way that we had to kind of genuflect and bow to the guy who was leading it all was so hierarchical.
Wow.
It was almost like he was the guru, and we were.
Yes.
Yeah.
So even Buddhism, you cannot strip
Right.
yourself out of it, and that's why I wanted to end the book with this story of communism, because communism was the most recent attempt we've had to create a world without status. That's what communism is. Communism is we're going to be collective. It's all going to be about connection, no status. But they created one of the most brutally caste-bound societies that's ever existed. All that happened was they flipped it in upside down, so the previous rich people went out at the bottom of the game and the previous poor people went out at the top of the game, and there was even more discrimination and oppression in the Soviet Union than there was previously. It was just that they kind of flipped it over. So you can't, and of course the way that people worshipped Stalin like a god, like a literal god, everything he said was just sacred and could not be contradicted by pain of imprisonment or death. You can't do it. You can't scrub it out of the system because it's in the brain and it's been there for millions of years.
You talked about the higher up in status you are, the longer you are likely to live.
Yeah.
How does that work? What's the mechanism?
Well, that is, that's being investigated. But the best explanation we have for that comes from this part of science called social genomics. And social genomics is this cutting edge corner of science that looks at how our social life affects the function of our genes. It's quite well known these days that loneliness is very bad for us physically. So the human brain craves connection and status. So when we lack connection, we feel lonely. What happens is that the brain sets our genes into a certain state where we're expecting problems. So it raises inflammation, it lowers antiviral response, and that was fine back in the days of the hunter-gatherer tribe, and when danger would come quickly and pass quickly. Yeah. But in these days, when loneliness can be this chronic thing, it's very bad for our bodies to be in that situation for a long time. And the same is true of status. If the body, if the brain perceives that we're struggling for status, it's also going to flip us into that high inflammatory state and the low antiviral response state, which makes us vulnerable.
Increased cortisol
yes.
levels,
Yes.
Increased likelihood of diabetes, autoimmune conditions.
Exactly, Alzheimer's, cancer, like the whole lot. Like inflammation is really, really bad for us, and so that's the best explanation. And it's a really serious, like it's not like a mild effect as well. One of the biggest studies that's ever looked at this is called the Whitehall studies. A guy called Dr. Michael Marmot did that, and of course Whitehall, being the civil service, is the engine that turns law into. Government policy into law and practice. So a massive organisation, very hierarchical. And when Marmot's team looked at health outcomes, he found that the lower the status, the worse, the higher the mortality rate. And it wasn't because people down the pecking order were poorer. They were all earning a decent wage. Even the person one step up from the very top, so very privileged and well off, had slightly worse health outcomes from the person above them. So he calls this a status syndrome. And it was really significant. So in middle-aged people, the people at the top versus the bottom had the bottom had 4 times higher mortality rates than people at the top. So very, very significant differences in health outcomes.
Is there a gender difference in not gaining status? So meaning, is the outcome different with inflammatory conditions, for example, and earlier death between men and women if neither of them are able to climb the status pole?
I don't think so. Not as far as I know. The only specific gender, sort of obvious gender difference there is, I think, is in suicide rates. I think male suicide, men kill themselves around 80% of suicides are male, and it clusters around middle age, and one of the big reasons for that is thought to be status. So it's in middle age that people kind of hit up against their limitations and start to feel like losers and all that stuff, and I think that's one of the reasons why middle-aged men kill themselves in such high numbers, and that's international, that's around the world.
Wow.
But to some degree, they say the more higher you get up, in the status, it gets more lonelier at the top, the famous saying. So don't you think that a lot of people in higher positions also go through depression and suicide and everything as well? Then obviously people down lower in the hierarchy system.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that surprised me about studying the status games is that we are playing these like little local games. So it's not like it's not like one status game that's all of humanity. Because if it was, everybody would be comparing themselves to the King of Thailand or Michelle Obama or Taylor Swift and feeling completely suicidal every day, going, oh my God. Yeah. So we don't compare ourselves to the ones at the top or the ones at the bottom. We compare ourselves to the people most like us. Right. So we play these little sort of micro status games almost, where we don't really care what somebody up there or somebody down there thinks of us that much. It doesn't bother us that much, but we care very much about the people close to us. Absolutely, getting very high in the status game doesn't free you of status anxiety. Elon Musk is not free of status anxiety. Taylor Swift is definitely not free of status anxiety, because Taylor Swift is comparing herself with these other young female artists that are also coming up and biting at her heels. Elon Musk is comparing himself to Jeff Bezos. That's how it works.
Yes.
Yeah. Why? Because you can't fall. That's the worst bit. Yeah. Is you can't afford to go down. Even if you incrementally go up at a nice pace, you can't fall.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It becomes really competitive.
And the thing about status is you can't have it, you can't see it, you can't touch it, because it exists in the minds of other people. Other people give you status. You can't demand it from people unless you're doing dominance in a mafia or something like that.
I could completely resonate to this, because I was former editor of a magazine for 10 years.
Yeah.
And suddenly, when I left, that status just went. I just didn't feel that everybody around me or my peers had the same respect, because I felt I lost the power all of a sudden. And it did change dynamics between, my circles, because I felt like almost sometimes that they only wanted to know me because of my power and the status that I was in. Yeah. And they didn't actually want to know me now because they didn't know where I was going to go off to. And then you do feel lonely, because you're suddenly working in a team. You're in a really top position where everyone's looking up to you. You're inspiring, you're actually changing the way a magazine is formed, and you are in so much control to make a change and make a positive difference. And then suddenly, overnight, just by you leaving, it's all taken away from you. And then you feel lonely.
So the next question for me is, you talk about we live our life in our brains. So, we have vibrations around us and we interpret that in our minds, and it's really just a hallucination in our mind. Now, if we are lower in the status games and that leads to illness, can we make up a fake reality in our brains where we have higher status and have healthier bodies?
Well, you can certainly learn to tell a healthier, more statusful story about yourself. That's definitely true. I think there's always capacity to reframe how you're doing in life. Whenever we go through periods of struggle, and maybe those periods of struggle are sudden and dramatic and unpleasant losses of status, we kind of automatically become heroic, because if you're struggling and surviving, you're being heroic. It often strikes me this kind of horrible irony that the moments in life when we feel least heroic are actually the moments where we are most heroic, because we're struggling, we're in that pit, we're in that trough. So when you weren't the magazine editor anymore, you probably felt, I'm such a loser, I'm such a failure. But you weren't a loser and a failure, because you were fighting back, and you did fight back. You found a new status game to play, and you climbed it, and you succeeded. So I think it's always there's always capacity for us to tell a more statusful story about ourselves that isn't untrue. It's just a reframing of where we're at. So I definitely think that's true.
Okay, I've seen people do that where they change the goalposts. Their own goalposts of their own life.
Yeah. Well, we do that, and one of the funny things that psychologists find about us is that one of the ways that the brain automatically does that goalpost thing is it decides that high status things are the things that we have. So if you're an extrovert, you'll go, they're so friendly and they won't stop talking. They're so energetic. I love being around them. They're wonderful. But that quiet one over there, they're awful. So they're low status. But the introvert will go, oh, they're so loud. Those extroverts, they're idiots. I hate them. So we tend to value stuff in the world that's like that has the qualities that we have. So that's the brain doing that thing automatically.
That's so interesting.
My next question to you is why do we copy those that we admire so much in a higher status than us? Why do we want to so much replicate everything that they do?
Well, that's really a core part of how the status game evolved and how the core part of the status game works and is functional. It helps create successful human life. So we're programmed subconsciously to figure out who are the high status people in my group, in my game. And when we figured that out, we start behaving in certain ways. So one of the ways is that we start flattering them and bringing them cups of tea and going, oh God, you're amazing and fantastic. And why do we do that? We do that because the brain wants to get close to that person, because the brain's going, that person's high status, I want to be high status. I need to learn from that person. And in order to learn from that person, you kind of bribe them with flattery. The other thing that happens is that you copy and conform to them. So you do what they say and you just start copying them. And humans are these amazing copying animals. We're like kind of hyper copiers. We copy everything that high status people are doing. Like I always remember when I was a kid, the first high status person I glommed onto was Nick Kershaw, who was this 80s pop star. I was obsessed with Nick Kershaw. And I even remember noticing it in myself where I saw him on TV AM and he was being interviewed like this, but he had his legs crossed in this weird way, like his ankles were on his knees. It's a very expansive way. And then the next day at school, I noticed I was sitting in that way and thinking, why am I sitting like Nick Kershaw? It's so weird. And I remember thinking that's weird, but also thinking, I like it though. It's good. I'm going to start sitting like Nick Kershaw. And that's that stuff. That's the brain spotting high status people and just automatically copying them. And that's why we copy how people that we admire dress. We copy their tastes in literature and music. We might copy their hairstyles. That's why all writers look the same and all health people look the same, all singers look the same, because they're all kind of copying, the high status people in that group. Yeah.
So my question is now for my younger self. So, 11, 12-year-old girl. Couple of questions. One is, in a playground full of the same uniform, you tend to find a couple who everyone copy, flatters, conforms to. What are they looking at? What are they looking for in that one cool kid that everyone wants to be with? They have the most amount of influence. They have the most amount of opportunities. Doors open for them and everyone listens to what those kids have to say. I'm just going to put out there, it wasn't me. So who is it? What are they looking at? What am I missing?
Well, again, it's all subconscious. So all of that stuff in the playground, none of the people are going to be aware that they're doing it. But there are lots of things the brain is looking for. So one of the things is simple things like high status people are allowed to talk for longer and are interrupted less. So little things like that. High status people have more people around them. So the brain sees who is everybody else attending to? Who is everybody else sort of copying and flattering and conforming to? Because that's the person that I'm going to attend to as well. So yeah, there are lots of things. And there are other things like, back in the days of the hunter-gatherer tribe, the forager tribe, when this stuff was evolving, people marked their status out in ways they were dressing or in things they were wearing. So a big headdress or a collection of skulls around their hut from kills in the hunt or enemies that they killed, and this is the same as wearing jewelry or amazing trainers. I met with some old school friends recently and they brought some photos with them of us at school to the dinner, and it was funny to see, because I'd forgotten this, that we all had this special way of wearing our ties where we'd tuck the fat bit inside our shirt and then we'd just have the thin bit outside and then the thin bit went in there for some reason. It was this really specific way.
Cool she was also cool, so she knows this little trick.
And it was like I'd forgotten about that, and it's a ridiculous thing, but it's a way of marking out who are the cool kids, because the cool kids did that.
So you two
we would adapt it a little bit differently, and I was told, just by, again, like you, similar story, just meeting some old school friends saying, you were really the popular one. Everyone wanted to be your friend, and all the boys wanted to, fancied you. So you were seen as a popular one. I go, was I? They go, yeah, you were.
She knows she was a popular one. I'm sorry, you can't not know.
You'd be the rebel, literally, because they'd say to you, you're not allowed any rings or, little things. You're not allowed to wear jewellery or you're not allowed to wear certain, but you just adapt and restyle it in a different way. Hence why I started my career in styling. Seeing then, it was forming from a young age, from passion. But yeah, it's same that you'd be the few rebel kids that would do things a little bit differently and restyle your clothes differently and
Do you think they know things as well? I felt like they were also the kids who had older siblings and they just knew things a little bit ahead of everybody else. They knew what the coolest magazines were, or they knew the latest whatever.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's a kind of way of measuring competence, isn't it? Like, who are the people that know stuff that I want to know about how to get high status, and it's a kind of form of competence. But I think that's right about having that kind of insider knowledge. Often the cool kids had elder siblings that were the cool kids. Amongst the boys, it's the guys who were good at football.
Sports.
It wasn't me. but kids like me got status by misbehaving, and one of the ways that you can achieve status is partly one of the ways that we measure status in other people is when people are attending to you. So one of the ways to get everyone to attend to you is by being really loud and obnoxious and disrupting class. So that was my strategy, certainly, for getting attention. And it's one of those runaway things, attention, because when one person is getting all the attention, then the other people around in the periphery go, oh, that person must be the high status person. So then they start watching them, and then so they become more high status. And psychologists call this the Paris Hilton effect.
Yes.
Which is really funny because you get these otherwise completely unremarkable people who become globally famous because it's this runaway effect of more people and more people and more people and more people are just attending to this person.
How much free will do we have to choose our status games, or do the games choose us based on genes, upbringing, environment?
I think we have surprisingly little. I mean, we have more in the West. We have more than most because we have this system where we can be educated, and we've had this amazing menu of careers that we can choose. Assuming that we're not really at the bottom and really struggling to survive, which of course a lot of people are. But even then, I think it's surprisingly little. I think, as I said, we all have a certain genotype. Our brains are designed a certain way, and the way that kind of genetic direction of our brains gets focused in childhood. So by the time we're late adolescent, early 20s, we kind of are who we are. Our brains are finished being wired up. And yes, we're going to change a little bit as we go throughout our lives in predictable ways. And I think who we are really directs the kinds of games that we play in life. So an introvert isn't going to try and be Beyonce. Somebody who's very interested in, or somebody that's sort of very nerdy isn't going to go and want to play in a basketball team, for example. So naturally you're drawn to the social groups and to the professional status games that fit with who you are genetically and personality wise.
So my next question to you would be, how humans crave both status and connection, but often status takes away from our loved ones.
Yes.
Which, I've obviously faced a lot with my career and always working, and the impact it's had on my relationships and with my parents as well. And many lead to others obviously pulling away. So how do we get a healthy dose of both?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, where's the balance?
Yeah, I think humans need connection and status. We can get that connection from our groups, from our workplaces, but of course there's always a tension there, especially for high achieving people. That when your status games are going really well, there's that constant temptation to separate yourselves from your family. I don't think there's any magic answer to how to do it apart from just to be mindful of it.
Yeah, I think the next question for me is on children who've gone through trauma and who maybe don't have connection, and maybe don't have the means to improve in the competence games, and so then go down the dominance route in order to gain connection in gangs that you discussed. What measures are these kids, because they do know in terms of, this is a good route and this is a bad route. This is going to make me feel better. It's going to improve my status. I'm going to get connection here. but I know it's not the right move. What are they supposed to do in that situation?
Well, yeah, this is one of the things that's really changed the way I see the world, is understanding all that stuff about drugs gangs, about terrorist gangs, because people, especially adolescent people, they need status, and young men really need status, and that's why lots of young men are much more, obviously, more violent than women. So that's why violence concentrates in young men in low socioeconomic groups, because status is hard to come by, and they get very chippy about if you disrespect. Beware if you disrespect them, because they're going to make sure that you attend to them in status by using dominance. But you look at the world as it is in the West. We tend to measure our status in money, in achievement, in kind of cars and flats and how much money we have. And so if you're a young person very low on the socioeconomic scale, that's raised in an estate in Stockwell with one parent and all that stuff, and you're 19 years old, what are your sources of status? What status games is the world offering you? Well, you can go and work in Tesco's, stacking bread, or you can join this gang. I mean, really, there's no competition.
Yes.
And that's the answer to the question of why do these kids, they're going to end up dead or in prison? But the brain doesn't care about dead or in prison. The brain cares about status. All brains are asking the question all the time, especially in youth. Who do I have to be in this place in order to get connection and status? Because that's who I'm going to be.
So face-to-face interaction is very important for the development of the child's mind. And also, I believe, gives them a sense of value and status. If your parents, I know, for example, with my two kids, I have to give them equal eye contact. Yesterday, both doing a dance to Descendants, and if it wasn't like literally 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, well, honestly, there would be,
amazing.
There'd be issues.
Yeah.
So literally face-to-face time is essential. Eye contact is essential. Smiling the same amount. Giving the same amount of compliments,
To both.
But now I feel like more and more parents have got their heads buried in their phones. So they literally pushing the pram and head in their phone. You're at dinner with your kid and your head is in your phone. Like, I feel like the eye-to-eye contact is not there. The praising of the child is not there. The grounding of the child in the parent attachment is being lost. Do you feel like children are losing status with their parents and also losing connection and attachment because of this new phenomenon? We never had this last generation.
Yeah. I mean, I've not seen any data on this. It's an interesting idea. I've never thought of this idea before, but certainly I think what you're saying is correct. And it's interesting with your children. It shows that status detection system is firing even in young children if they're monitoring the eye contact and they're demanding equal eye contact. So yeah, certainly I think if you've got a parent who's chronically addicted to their phone at the expense of giving their children attention, that would be a bad thing. I think in my generation, for Gen X, the problem was that there was this idea out there which they called self-esteem, which was that they noticed that successful children were ones who had high self-esteem, so they thought the answer was to give everybody high self-esteem. So they called it a social vaccine. If you could make everybody think they're amazing, they're going to become amazing. And so there was a whole generation of parents that was like, you're amazing, you're incredible, you're wonderful, you're fantastic. And it doesn't work. What it does is it creates narcissism, because it's unattached from competence and virtue. And I think what's the more sensible way of children is rewarding virtue and rewarding competence. And rewarding effort and rewarding the sincere attempts at virtue and sincere attempts at competence. The mistake that my generation of parents made was just rewarding everything, and when you divorce status from actual achievement or the attempt at achievement, then you've broken the millions of years old system that's there in place too.
It's really hard though as a parent because I don't know if I should be disclosing this. There we go. So my daughter, for example, she's just like me. I'm acting, singing, dancing, and she's very much the same as me. But just neither of us are very good at them. But, I had my mum saying, you're amazing. And so in my head, I thought it was wonderful. But now I'm looking at my daughter and I think, okay, I love the passion, but you're probably not going to be a singer. So I'm going, you know what, Sienna, just get loads of skills and then skill stack and maybe sing a little bit on the side of being a doctor, or whatever it is. I'm just joking, don't be a doctor. But but just have lots of things under your belt. But when they're really passionate about something they're not very good at,
God, yeah. It's the Simon Cowell thing.
You tell me, how do you do that without crushing their spirit?
Yeah.
Because you want them to have confidence. You want them to get on stage and speak and sing a line. And, you want them to have confidence to come out of their comfort zone and try new things. But if you crush them at 10 by going, genes are not all there, how would you do that?
Well, I think it's important not to get carried away with the status thing. It's not status isn't the only thing. Connection isn't the only thing. We can get pleasure out of, I love cycling, but I'm a terrible cyclist. When I realised how slow, I get overtaken literally by pensioner couples. I feel like I'm on my bike, and I've got this expensive bike and they're on these old push bikes like that, honestly. But I enjoy it, and so there's not much status in it for me, but I enjoy it. So pleasure still exists, and it's fine for if your daughter loves dancing. But I think the danger is when you start saying rather than, oh, it's great that you're enjoying dancing, you're an amazing dancer.
Right.
That's when it starts getting dangerous, because then they're going to believe you. Oh, great,
yes.
I'm amazing.
Mummy thinks I'm an amazing dancer, so I am.
And I think as a parent, it's about identifying identifying the thing that they're quite good at, that they enjoy doing, and then pushing that and encouraging that.
Yeah.
Good, because I think if you want to be happy in life, you want to have an emotionally stable adulthood, we always think about money, but it isn't about money. Happiness is about identity. It's about how connected am I, how much status do I have, and those are the two ways that we measure our identity, that we feel either good or bad about who we are. And you can be perfectly happy living a relatively poor life if you're connected and you feel that you have value. If your status game doesn't have to pay very much, but people will admire you and respect you and go, this is amazing what you're doing, you can be as happy as somebody earning 10 times what you're earning. It really isn't about money. It's about connection and status. So I think it's that thing. If you want to have happy kids, figure out the thing that they're quite good at, because if they can spend their life doing something that they are above average at, and that other people are going to go, God, that's really good. That's meaning. That's purpose. And that's, I think that's the greatest gift you can give your child, is meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. Do
100%.
you feel that your upbringing yourself as a child impacted your status?
That's a good question. It impacted my status. I think it has done in the sense that it's probably held me back. Yeah, I mean, I had a very unhappy childhood. I went to a very bad school. I mean, I already mentioned I behaved quite badly, but I left school without any A levels. I didn't go to university. I was actively discouraged from writing by my English teacher. Yeah, so I saw
that on a podcast.
Yes.
I was like, and congratulations to you for obviously, claiming and, actually following your dreams.
Oh, thank you.
And doing it.
Yeah, I mean, so you've seen it already, but I had this teacher who, the only thing I liked doing was writing. So I'd write these short stories at my weekends and give them to my teacher all proudly on Monday. Thinking that he was impressed because William was finally, found something he liked doing, and he just looked at me and went, this is all extra work for me, don't you? And I was just like, oh God, I was really embarrassed. So I just stopped doing it, so I think it has held me back in the sense that, in the media world that I'm in, connection is everything. So you see people who've been to Oxford and Cambridge, and they go, whoa, because they know the controllers, the editors, the gatekeepers. I don't know anybody. So there's that I think that's held me back. But also just the fact that I didn't really start writing properly until I was 26. That's when I started sort of writing professionally. So and I think if I'd have been encouraged at school, I would have got on much quicker and probably got a lot further. I think I wasted a long time because I just thought, well, what's the point of that?
Oh God, that's so crushing. Same thing happened to me. I mean, I'm dyslexic.
Oh, right.
And I remember same thing in my English class, and Shall I say her name? No, I'm not going to say her name.
Go on.
Name and
Still that
shame.
naughty kid I am. No, but I just remember her saying, look, you're going to get a C. And I knew if I got a C, I'd be killed by my parents. I have immigrant parents and I had to become a doctor. And I would never have gotten into medical school. They sacrificed everything for me to get into medical school. So, I mean, it was just, I don't think she fully understood what she was saying. Saying that sentence to me would have meant my life was over. Like, death was the next step for me. You know, there was no room for failure when you're an immigrant's child, right?
Because they work so hard.
But a lot of teachers don't understand the impact they have. And so then I did this wonderful course. I don't know if you've heard of Tony Robbins.
Yes.
Yeah,
of course.
I did his course at 14 years old.
Wow.
With all my cousins, my grandparents, my aunts, uncles, my tribe, all did the Tony Robbins course.
Wow.
And it transformed all our lives.
Did it really?
Yeah. So for
that's
me,
amazing.
the trajectory of my life changed. I went from, dyslexic in a very bright school. It was like the top school in the country, and everyone were Mensa students. And thinking I was just going to fail, and your status is so far away from everybody else's status. To thinking what he taught was, don't listen to what anybody else tells you. Only you know what you're capable of. And don't listen to your parents, your teachers, your friends. You decide what you want to achieve. You figure out someone else has done it. You learn from them everything they do. You read everything they do. You try and be their friend if it's someone that you know, or you learn as much as you can, and you imitate. So it's literally what you're saying: copy, flatter, conform.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I did that for German with Heidi Evans. I did that with English. So I found one person in each class. Got my 8 A stars, 2 A's. Got into medical school, and then made me think: do you know what? If my teachers thought I couldn't achieve this, and I achieved this astronomical, award at a time that I didn't think I was ever going to get there, what else can I achieve? And that's what Tony Robbins, that one weekend, I just feel like transformed mine and everybody around me's ambition and what they could go on to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. What an incredible story. Yeah, and I think if we had I think a great teacher can do that to if you're lucky enough to have one.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Everyone buy his book. It's not a plug.
Did your parents ever try and encourage you to then go and write? I know your teachers didn't, but did
Not
your
really,
parents?
no, they didn't really. No, I mean, one of the things I did at school was I launched this school newspaper because I wanted to be a journalist as well, and it was definitely on the edge. It was it was full of like gossip about, because we were in a mixed sex school, about what was going on, and like it was and like sarcastic stories about the teachers. Like it was definitely on the edge, but they weren't very happy about that. But no, I mean they didn't really encourage me very much. No.
Well, I found your chapter really interesting about the symbolism within the luxury designer collection, because obviously being from a fashion background, which can identify with your wife as well. We were all about our branded logos and our designer bags and how big our logos were at that point, and letting everyone know that our, designer bag had a Chanel or had a Gucci, obviously, symbol on it. But you're right, it's changed dramatically now, where I feel you're right. It's not, now it's about the smaller the logo, and if anyone's got Fendi all over them or Louis Vuitton just stamped on them, immediately.
That's low status.
That's low status.
Yeah.
But now, obviously, the higher you up in the status game, the symbol is, you either don't see it or it's very subtle, or like you said, it's inside as well. But do you think that's the same thing when it comes to like flashy cars and, because they're all status, like material objects in the status games as well?
There's always flux because to be high status, you've got to be, you can't be high status if everybody is the same as you. You've got to keep changing. So a lot of this stuff is just reactions to it against. So 1 year big trousers are going to be in, the next year narrow trousers are going to be in. My wife's always complaining my trousers are too baggy, and I noticed that Damon Albarn was wearing baggy trousers. I was like, Damon Albarn's got baggy trousers on, I'm going to stick with the baggy trousers. So things are always in flux, and often it's simply just a reaction to as soon as enough people catch on that this particular thing is high status and it becomes ubiquitous, then it's going to change. It's going to sort of change and keep changing and keep changing and keep changing. So there's always this churn at the top because the elite want to keep themselves separate from the masses.
Yeah. I just want to go back to something you said right at the beginning, actually, of the interview, which was, you don't want to not play the status games. Like, status games are very important for evolution. It's very important for us to strive and be aspirational. I think my question is, I feel like empathy for those people who maybe aren't able to play status games as well, even if they're trying really hard. And this is coming really from the dyslexic kid in me. When I was trying really hard and, you know, you're just not achieving and you just feel like you're in a cave. You feel like you're trapped and you're not sure how to get out. And I think it's those people who like want to opt out of the status games, that just kind of want to just be and like be happy. But, you know, they're human and we are evolved to play these status games. And what would you say to those people? Because I think that's a huge percentage of the population, especially if we live in this perfect world that we are striving to with social media. I think many people are stuck here where they're thinking, you know, I'm never going to look like that, you know, model. And that seems to be everybody on social media. And I didn't get as many likes as my friend who, you know, has got that perfect body. I mean, what do you say to those who maybe aren't as competent at that particular skill?
Well, I think the good thing, one of the best things about living where we do in the West is that we have this plethora of status games to choose from. And you can get status from almost anywhere. You can get status from collecting matchboxes. You know, you can become the best matchbox collector. You can get status from volunteering. You can go and work. You can go and volunteer for the Samaritans and literally save lives. You can do a few months training and you can be on the phone and you can save people's lives. That's amazing. Yeah. Anyone can do that. Yeah. So I think the trap is that when we find ourselves in the status games that life has kind of thrown us into, we don't really choose them volitionally and we fail in them, and then we just think, well, I'm a failure, that's my identity, is failed. Right. And we get depressed, and I think that's the trap that we tend to fall into, because we compare ourselves to these incredible high status people. We compare ourselves to the most beautiful people on social media and the most talented people on television, but that isn't the only way that we can become of value and feel of value to the human family. So my advice would always be to try and find a new status game to play, and really an easy win is, as I say, it's volunteering, because you don't have to be amazingly competent. You can be virtuous, like the Pope or the Dalai Lama. These are global superstars that they're not good at anything, those two dudes. But you know, what are they competent at? But they're not famous because of their competence. They're famous because of their goodness, their perceived goodness within their groups. And so that is a tried and tested path to feeling of value. And even if you think, oh, that's not me, it is, because it's your subconscious will notice when you start volunteering for that organisation, and then you do a shift and you think, I've really helped somebody today, everything starts to feel better. Yeah. So there are always new games to go and play, even if you feel like they don't mean anything. They will mean something to your subconscious. They will mean something to that thing that's making you feel miserable will start to
completely agree with you.
I love that perspective on it, because I think a lot of people connect status with being in like a negative connotation. It sometimes looked, like you said, or frowned upon.
Of course. Yeah.
And it can seem a bit more egotistical. So, you know, and I think your perspective on this book really balances it out. Like you said, you could be someone doing charity work, to someone being really high up in a position. You all play the status games. What game would you say that you play?
Well, I mean, I'm a writer, obviously.
Yeah. So you do play within like other peers of writers, or competing with writers, or
definitely. And as you find your niche in writing, the people that you're competing with are, you know, become different. So I think that's that. I definitely feel like obviously being a writer is part of the status game. I'm gonna my wife works for Substack. I'm going to be launching my Substack early next year, but I'm already feeling a bit self-conscious about that, because she's also got a Substack and she's just killing it. She's got like, thousands and thousands. I can't remember, like 100,000 subscribers. So it's like, oh gosh, I don't want to feel like I'm competing. I'm never.
The status game's right there.
Yeah, that's where the love comes in. Thank God, because if I didn't love her, I'd be like, oh my God. So I'm never going to catch up in a million years. I've just got to deal with that. So that's that. I also do volunteer. So that's something that I've done, and I've done that specifically because of writing the status game. At the end of the status game, I advise playing multiple games, especially for people in middle age, because that's when things start getting a bit choppy in terms of status. So I volunteer too, and that's definitely changed my life for the better. It's something that I promise you, I would never have considered it for a moment for writing this book. I'd be like, oh, soppy, ridiculous, hippie. But I do that now, and that's that. You know, it almost feels like a validation of the book, really, because obviously it's nothing to do with money at all, and it's a big commitment. It's like 16 hours a month, but I definitely makes me happier, and it gives my life meaning. I feel like I've got a more meaningful life. And I know that subconsciously that's because I've got another source of status now.
Completely agree. I do the same thing with Sienna. Is we do charity work every month. So like Hindus call it seva, Christians call it charity. So so every religion I think has got their own version. But charity is so important. I always just thought it was something that you do just to give back to humanity. But I never thought of it as this is important for your own status, for your own view of yourself.
Yeah, but I think you can't separate them. Like I think it's dangerous to think, oh well, it's not for other people, it's for me, because it isn't. That you can't disconnect them. Because you're helping other people, you get the reward of status, and so they're connected. So they're connected, and I say that's one of the best things about the human condition. That's wired into us. When we are selfless and good, and we help people, we feel good about ourselves, and other people go, oh, you did an amazing thing. Like it's automatic. And so that's status at its best.
100%. I think kids need to be doing this. Teenagers need to be doing this, because if they're in the situation where they are so nervous about other people judging them, that it's, and they're in this perfect world, they need it more than ever actually to be doing charity work and playing this status game, because even if they lose at all the others, they've got this one win under their belt. They can say, at least I'm really good at this. I think we need it more than ever actually.
Absolutely.
But I think we've almost lost it a little bit. I know it was hard for me to get my daughter in to do charity work because of her age, and I think now that there's so much red tape, actually a lot of charities don't want kids around. You just don't know who's coming through the door.
Issues, They're so paranoid about that stuff these days.
But actually, they need it.
Yeah, and that's the fundamental of the human condition. That's how we've evolved. Virtue and competence. Those are those two ways that people judge you. Are you good, and are you contributing value in the sense of, do you know stuff that's going to help the group and that I can learn from and help me? And so if a kid has got those two things covered, a bit of virtue and a bit of competence, that's an amazing foundation for an adult life.
100% agree. We need to do more
charity
we need to encourage
lots. Because we do food, obviously, for the food banks. And
raising money is one thing.
Yeah.
And, they don't see it. Like, say they go for a charity walk and they raise whatever. They don't see where that money goes. But when they're actually bagging food for, the homeless, they see where their effort is going. It's a completely different feeling for them. They can't do, like, Samaritan work. They because 11 or 10, there's not much they can do.
No.
So walk around the park a few times, guys.
But I also think that about tax, like, weirdly. Like, we all pay tax, and the tax, that's an amazing thing that we do. We all pay a lot of money towards roads, cars, the welfare state. And the government makes no effort to go, thank you. You did an amazing thing. This year you contributed this amount, and this pays for this many nurses. It feels like an easy win for governments to do that.
You're so
because
right.
So we never get to know.
We all should have. Everybody who pays tax deserves a bit of virtue status in response, because their hard work and dedication has contributing to the public good.
Yes, collectively.
But nobody ever says thank you. They just say, get it in on time or else. So
so right. Okay, guys. Government, please. You need to make reels. Say, £1 million has gone here. 10 million pounds has gone here. Show us.
That would be.
That would do well, wouldn't it?
It would make you feel good.
We would like our government.
Of course. Especially when we're contributing.
And you deserve to feel good too. I think everybody who pays tax deserves to have that bit of status given to them. It doesn't. Yeah. So I think
it makes us all feel good, because right now all you see is negativity. The news makes you terrified. Have you heard about the nurse? My God, come on. So we do need some positive news, I think, and this would do really well for the next generation as well. Okay, so you have a chat with Rishi.
I will. Did meet him before he
10 Downing Street, we're coming to knock on your door
for Diwali. So for you now personally, Will, what inspired you or doing the transition from being a journalist and a successful journalist to then being an author? Because you've obviously successfully published now 6 books. That's huge. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's huge.
Well, there's a few. It's quite complex. Obviously, writing books is much less stressful than journalism. So I was a freelance journalist, so that means you're constantly hustling. So I'd have to do 2 or 3 big stories a month in order to pay my mortgage, and not earn that much. But so you're kind of, when you're writing for the Guardian Weekend and the Sunday Times Magazine in the UK, at least you're at the top of your game. But it doesn't really pay very much. So there was the financial thing, but also there's the anxiety of it constantly, and chasing bills and invoices. And so books are better in the sense they don't necessarily pay that much more, but you've got like, okay, this is what I'm doing for the next 2 years. So that was one of the reasons that I was sort of pleased to make that transition.
Okay.
And also it's just more satisfying too, like to write 90, 100,000 words on a subject is a much more satisfying intellectual challenge than writing like 2,000 words.
Absolutely. What's your dream? What's your big dream? Do you have a big dream?
I don't know. It's weird. I don't really have. Well, I mean, I suppose I do have a few things that I would love. Like if you ask my wife, she would tell you what Will's always wanted to do is go on a book tour. Like when I see an authur that's got a book tour with tours, I'm like, imagine going on a book tour. It'd be amazing.
You should totally do a book tour.
I never know nobody would turn up.
I promise you they'll turn up.
We would turn up. We would be there.
So that's this weird thing. That's something I've always fantasized about. That's never quite managed to get. So, but also I think like before I wanted to be a journalist, I wanted to write fiction. So I think that's my big dream is to write a novel that is successful. I've written a novel that was published but wasn't successful. It had some nice reviews, but nobody really bought it. So I think that's the big professional dream for me, is to be able to sort of crack fiction. That's the big. It's a lot harder than non-fiction. It's in a sense, is it because what I'm doing now is standing on the shoulders of giants. They've come up with all this stuff, and I'm just sort of turning it into something hopefully a bit new. But fiction is brand new from the ground up, so it's harder. But I'd love to crack that nut.
So anything in the pipeline? Any more books coming along, or anything we can expect next?
Yes,
Are you allowed to reveal?
Yes, well, I've got a couple of books in the pipeline.
Oh, wow.
My next book is about. It's a bit more of a self-help book, really. It's about how we all experience our lives as a story, but this story is disguising a lot of weird subconscious stuff, and it's really about how to kind of live a better story in a way, and how to recognize the things that storytelling brain is going to get wrong, and it is going to sort of lead you down kind of false alleys and sort of into dangerous traps. So that's the idea I'm working on at the moment. It's sort of a guide to
so
the
interesting. I don't know how you put this together, because you've got a way of thinking about things that some of us have an inkling about, but you're able to fully crack and explain so beautifully that everyone can understand it. Have you always had this skill, or is it something that you had to learn?
Oh, well, that's very kind, thank you. I guess it comes from the journalism, is that you have to you have to explain things clearly, and in order to explain things clearly, you've got to really understand them. Because if you don't understand them, you can't explain them. So I think it comes from the journalism, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because as a journalist, you've got to be able to explain everything very clearly.
That's your number one job, really.
Supporting.
One of them,
yeah, absolutely.
That and telling the truth. And
Yes,
tell it clearly.
yes.
Like, those are the two
How
things.
are journalists doing on that right now?
Oh God, they don't always tell the truth,
No,
do they?
no,
All right, we know
no,
that.
yeah.
Tend to sensation. We know that, but that's what sells sometimes. But yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to share with us that we haven't asked that you dying to get off your chest?
No, I think you've asked some amazing questions, and I think we've covered a lot of ground, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure having you on.
Honestly, I
It's
can't.
been great to be here, thank you.
Thank you,
Wish
appreciate
all the
it.
best.
Thanks.
And how can everyone read your books, and what can they do to download or?
Well, you can find out my books on willstorr.com, my website, WILLSTORR.com, and on Twitter it's at WStorr. So that's where you can keep up with what I'm doing.
Thank you so much for watching. That was an incredible episode and someone I really look up to. So thank you very much for watching with us. We are in the comment section for 1 hour at the launch of every YouTube video. So when you subscribe, make sure you hit the notification bell so you can come and ask us your questions.
And don't forget to follow us on Taboo Table Talks on Instagram, and all the links on YouTube and Spotify where you can listen are on there as well. Thank you for watching.
Take care.
Bye.